on why you're here. If this is your first time joining us, make yourselves known in the chat.
Thank you.
And certainly if you have, I'll ask this again a little later on, but if you are calling in from a fellow gardening community of any sort, please send us a link so that I can add you all to our map, because these are just a few samplings of stories that I know that there are a lot more of. So we'll wait just another couple minutes. And so you're all aware this is being recorded. So those of you that know other people who wanted to hear these stories but can't be here tonight, it will be on our connections call page on our website, along with a plethora of other stories from the past, I think 2 years now, we've had connection calls every month. So I'm excited to share all of those stories, and excited to see all of you coming on here.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you all for joining. Okay. So if you can see, if you can mute yourself, please do so for any background noise so we can hear our speakers. And let's see, 8:01, I'll give us another couple minutes. I know that some people are still traveling and logging in, and there are so many buttons to hit. And if you're like me, you wait to the last minute to log on to all of these things. So glad to see where everybody's coming from. And all of these notes, I'm excited to say too, that if you can add things to the chat, I will have a chat log that I pull from to then share the notes after the connections call. So I know sometimes people share a lot of information. You don't have to feel like you have to jot it all down. I will get the pertinent information on the connection call site. So it being 8:02, and I see that we have a good collection of people in the room. I guess you might not all know me. My name is Phoebe Morad. I'm Executive Director of Lutherans Restoring Creation, and really pleased to have you all join us. And for whoever's watching us in the future, I'm excited that you joined us. So we are a grassroots group working to promote creation care in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And we work with the ELCA, but we're not part of the ELCA. So just so you know, we're not in anybody's institutional budget. So if you would like to join us in any way feasible for you, we'd really appreciate that. Very grassroots. So we'd love you to join us. And one way that you could join us is being a volunteer. So I want to first off thank the volunteer storytellers that are joining us tonight. They are joining us as storytellers to share their experiences and advice. They're not paid professionals. And another volunteer who really is one of the reasons we're here tonight is Pastor Herb Wounded Head III, who honestly, he said he was willing, yay, he said he was willing to volunteer. And I asked, what are you passionate about? And he said, you know, I see all these huge lawns out there, and I know that there are ways to grow food instead of lawns, and I wonder why we don't do that more. So I'm really grateful for him also offering his volunteer time to gather a lot of these stories, and we're hoping to put more and more of them on the map so that we can hear each other's voices and maybe even commiserate. I also want to thank him because he is willing to offer our land acknowledgement this evening. As we start off, I'm going to hand the baton over to Herb. If you can unmute yourself and start us off with a land acknowledgement. Wherever your land, I forget where your feet are right now. You move around a lot.
I do. Hi, everybody. My name is Herb Wounded Head. My Lakota name is Wanbli Nalwicha Kijin, which means the eagle who defends the people. And it's my pleasure to be here with you and to be able to extend a little bit of history and acknowledgement about where we're at. I am in South Dakota, which is in Brookings, South Dakota. If you care anything about football or watched it recently, Brookings, South Dakota was in the FCS National Championship and they lost. So that's just kind of how the ball rolls, I guess, as we say. But for me, I am on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Oceti Sakowin, which means the Seven Council Fires, which is the proper name for the people referred to as Sioux. And the Sioux people went all the way from the Great Lakes to the Rocky Mountains, so to speak, or the Grand Tetons. So that's the proper name for the people referred to as the Sioux. We acknowledge that these sites were named by the American Indians, indigenous people to this region. The tribal alliance is made up of the 7 council fires, is based on kinship, location, and dialects. We have the Santee or the Dakota, the Yankton or the Nakota, and the Teton, which are the Lakota. So we acknowledge the sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized nations in South Dakota, which are the Cheyenne River, the Crow Creek, the Flandreau Santee, Laurel Brule, Oglala, Rosebud, Sisseton Wahpeton, Standing Rock, and Yankton Sioux tribes. So that is the land that we sit on here in South Dakota. And I know that there's been people who have mentioned their ancestral lands. So thank you for doing that today. And just to acknowledge that people were here before, and we're part of stewarding some of the land that that is here, and hope that you gain some knowledge and some experience here for things that you can do in places that you're at.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. And I do appreciate how many more people now are remembering to do this and recognize who were the first Earth Keepers on the land they find themselves on. I am really excited. I know we're just gonna scratch the surface of everybody's story that we have on here tonight. So I hope that you get in touch with people if you wanna know more, but we're gonna start off with hearing from Pastor Megan Manlove from Trinity Lutheran in Nampa, Idaho. So Megan, are you okay sharing your screen?
Yes.
Yay. Okay.
Just a second.
Yay. Yep, take your time. We're not going anywhere.
How's that?
That looks good. Yeah, that's great.
You might need to change your little view thing if you want to see my full slides, just for everybody out there. Okay, so yes, pastor at Trinity Lutheran Church in Nampa, Idaho. I was smiling big during Herb's time because I grew up in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and hearing all of those names just, yeah, makes me homesick. But I'm happy to be here in Idaho. So I've been the pastor at Trinity since November 2010, and I'm here to tell you about Trinity Community Gardens. Trinity Community Gardens Incorporated was founded in the spring of 2008 by 3 master gardeners, Paulette Blossig from St. Paul's Catholic Church in town, and Dale and Sheila Anderson from Trinity Lutheran. From the beginning, they were very clear about their mission: grow healthy produce and help others grow produce. Community partnerships were also key. My predecessor, Pastor Wendell Hendershot, who's now retired in Oregon, encouraged them to create their own nonprofit and put the home garden plot on the church's front yard. So the partnership with the congregation was primary. When I began at Trinity in 2010, the other key partners were Job Corps, the SILD or Sheriff Inmate Labor Detail, which brought volunteers out sometimes instead of cleaning the highway, and the University of Idaho Extension's Canyon County office. Later, Job Corps built its own garden, so we lost those volunteers, and funding for the SILD crew here in Canyon County has gone up and down. Extension horticulturist Ariel Egenbrand taught her 6-week Victory Garden series in Trinity's Fellowship Hall. This inspired our gardeners to start their own 2-day gardening workshop. A student collected all of the materials from the first classes and suggested compiling a book. We received a grant from the Idaho Episcopal Foundation and published a Spanish-English version of Growing to Feed Many. I am not a good gardener at all. The gift I've brought to this enterprise is really grant writing. The gardeners have often recruited labor for gleaning local vegetable fields. And I asked Ariel one day if there was a recipe book we might distribute with produce so people would easily know what to do with so much cabbage and kale, which is what we were mostly giving away, because everybody knows what to do with sweet corn. She did not know of such a resource, so I suggested an ELCA domestic hunger grant. Ariel encouraged me to talk to her colleague, Joey, a food preservation educator, and we added hands-on food preservation workshops to the grant. Ariel also encouraged her Master Gardener students to complete some of their required hours at Trinity Community Gardens. When Ariel moved to Ada County to work with small farms, I was seriously worried. Her successor had other ideas about volunteer hours, not quite the collaborator. And then in December 2014, Dale died at the age of 57. Dale had been on disability since Trinity Community Gardens founding and had donated countless mental and physical hours to the garden. I wondered what Paulette and Sheila, both still working full-time, would do. They stayed focused on growing produce, teaching classes, and fostering partnerships. The relationship with Trinity Lutheran remained steady, in part because of the garden's home plot being a physical reminder to the church-garden relationship. Also in 2014, 2015, and 2018, we helped organize a Nampa Spring Blessing of the Gardens tour. This helped nurture the connection with the congregation. This included the LDS or Mormons, Nazarenes, Episcopalians, Methodists. In 2019, Sheila let us know that the following year she would be moving to Oregon to be near her kids and grandchildren. Paulette was also retiring from the Forest Service, and I wondered what was her commitment. I wondered what was going to happen to the garden again. Meanwhile, a new horticulturist, Nick Usabel, came to Canyon County. Paulette and I both made a point to meet him. And then in February 2020, Lindsay Rhodes, the coordinator of neighboring West Middle School's 21st Century Club, made an appointment with me. We brainstormed lots of ideas, and in a conversation about gardens, I encouraged her to connect with Nick about the Extension Office's Junior Master Gardener program. A few months later, Kathleen Tuck, the coordinator of LDS volunteers in West Nampa, wanted to talk to me. We sat under a tree, this is now during the pandemic, in the front of the church and talked about various projects. I mentioned that Paulette was trying to get a crew together in the fall to replace some of the old raised beds in the home garden plot. Then I forgot all about these conversations. In October, Kathleen followed through and brought a small but dedicated crew to pull out the old beds and replace them. It was not until I started pulling out the rotten wood myself that I truly understand what had happened and how real the need was. In January, Lindsay asked me to meet with her again. Nick had trained a whole group of junior master gardeners at West Middle School, and they wanted to practice their skills. Could Trinity Community Gardens utilize these volunteers? I connected Lindsay and Paulette, and the youth have been volunteering all spring in the garden. Paulette, like Dale, is an enthusiastic teacher and a gardening mentor. One of the first community-wide meetings I attended in Nampa back in 2011 was for a high five grant the city received from the Blue Cross of Idaho Foundation. Trinity Community Gardens had been part of writing the proposal, hoping to start refrigerated mobile food produce in different parts of Nampa. After hours of meetings, piles of Post-it notes, and politics that I never actually inquired about, mobile food produce did not make the cut for the final grant implementation. But a few years later, a group of citizens started talking in earnest about food access in different pockets of Nampa, especially in North Nampa, where a grocery store had moved out. I still remember where I was standing in my home when retired nurse Pam Peterson called and invited me to a grassroots meeting. Jean Mucci's then 10-year-old daughter had an idea for mobile food produce. And the idea started getting some real traction. The traveling table was launched in partnership with Treasure Valley Leadership Academy, the Idaho Food Bank, Good News Food Pantry, Trinity Community Gardens, and other partners in January 2019. And when I volunteered a few weeks ago, I was told that the refrigerated truck has finally been purchased. So I do not know how or when the story of Trinity Community Gardens will end, but I think some lessons can be gleaned from its history. As we all help pivot to the new normal, we're well to be clear about our mission, to look for new partners, and know that our timeline may not be the same as the Holy Spirit's.
Amen. What a story. Thank you, Megan. That I feel like we need a timeline to go with that to follow all of that. Thank you so much. So remember questions, feel free to write them in the chat if you think of them along as we go through these stories. But next up, we're going to hear from Deacon Pat Harper in Chicago. And can you unmute yourself? Are you there, Pat? And I will share my screen. Are you calling from St. Stephen's, Pat, or?
No, I'm not at St. Stephen's right now.
Okay, just making sure. Okay. And I'm going to share the pictures that you sent me. Is that good?
That's fine.
Okay. This will just take me a minute. I'm doing everything with my left hand. It's a little messy. Okay. Okay, do you see pictures now?
Yes.
Excellent.
Again, I'm Pat Harper. I'm from St. Stephen's Lutheran Church, right in from the Chatham neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. So we are representing the inner city gardening. Our program started as part of the St. Stephen's Day Camp program, where we were faced with a food desert in our community, and a lack of vegetables, and abundance of fast food restaurants. And so we started talking about what we could do. We saw the yard and we thought there should be a garden here. Hence, within a couple of days, there was a garden being planted. But we really wanted to do an all-encompassing program that was healthy, was focused on healthy eating and healthy living. So that's one of our young girls who participated in the summer program, and that they had a wonderful time picking produce. She has chives, she has dill. We pretty much had the younger kids really focus on the herbs, and the adults and the older teens focused on some of the more bountiful or larger produce. But we started with the vegetable garden. We then, so first of all, St. Stephen's Garden has been in operation. This is our 12th year of gardening. We incorporated, after the first year, we incorporated a monarch butterfly sanctuary garden. The garden is approximately 1,200 square feet of vegetable gardening and 400 square feet of a monarch sanctuary. And I went up to the University of Minnesota and trained in monarch butterflies and learned more than I ever expected to know about it. But that's what we did. And we brought the program back. We trained children, other adults and young adults in butterfly raising. We took them to the Peggy Notabart Museum and did a seminar with them and more training on monarch butterflies. And then they came back and had the children actually raise butterflies. That's our butterfly garden. They raised butterflies. They fed them milkweed from the garden. And that's the training at the Peggy Notabart Museum of our young teens that were actually helping with the younger, smaller children. And so we released monarch butterflies into the garden after they became adult butterflies. So they were really small larvas into a full-blown monarch butterfly. And we talked a lot about the migration patterns, how it relates to us as African Americans and the migration that we took from the South to the North. So there's just a host of things that we were able to do around the monarch butterfly. And there's a whole new respect for butterflies in the community. I can be in the garden and someone will come up and say, Pat, I saw butterflies. And I'm like, yeah. So that's a wonderful part of our garden. Second of all, what we do with the garden is we do free farmers markets for the community, and we host 2 to 3 farmers markets throughout the summer. So we will literally package it up, have them come. We do food demonstrations. We give out recipes. We talk to them about eating healthy, and just a whole host of things. That's Kathy from Faith in Place, who actually led up our Monarch Butterfly teaching program that year. So we do the free farmers market. Those are wonderful experiences for the community. Everyone loves coming to the garden to talk about what to do with what. It was really, really nice to see the children actually see carrots come out of the ground. See some of the adults see cauliflower for the first time wrapped in its green leaves, saying, "What do I do with this?" And I'm like, "It's cauliflower." So it's amazing the disconnection we have with the food that we eat. We think of the food that we eat from the grocery store, which is packaged, which is handled, which is changed, which is a lot of different things. And so that's always just an experience that ebb and flows with the year and whoever comes around and whatever takes place. We also take, in our off weeks, we package, we do baskets, and we take them to other churches, and we bless them, and we share them with those churches for their consumption. So that's in our off weeks where we're not doing the free farmers market. All of our produce is given away free. We do write grants. Of course, we've gotten grants from the University of Minnesota through their backyard gardening program. We've gotten grants through Faith in Place. They actually produced or helped us with our butterfly garden and get it established. We've gotten the Joshua grant from, I can't think of the organization's name right now, but we've gotten grants along the way to keep us. We've got the hunger grant from the ELCA a couple years. And again, the grants ebb and flow as we see the opportunity to write a grant to support our initiatives. That's what we do. We also focus on getting donations from people that are interested in gardening and healthy eating and supporting just the cause. And there are people out there that are willing to do that as well. Something we're doing now. So we started with the kids and the young adults, but we've sort of, over the years, the needs change in the neighborhood. We have turned to a different direction prior to our most recent direction, but we started working with young men that are challenged, that are marginalized in the community and in the environment. And instead of volunteers, we started, because we always have a challenge with volunteers, we started providing stipends for young men that were marginalized in the community that wanted to be in the garden. And some of them were interested in the stipend, but once they got into the garden, there was a whole different experience for them. So we did that. We're now embarking on, I was contacted by someone from the University of Chicago, their Graduate School of Social Policy. They said, we heard about your garden. I was like, where'd you get my name from? But they have now decided to partner with us to actually look at other ways to bring healthy foods and vegetables to the community. So they are now helping us in terms of resources for farmers markets, for getting our garden started and things of that nature, which is a welcome change. So again, the goal is to just be flexible, let the Spirit lead us. We know that it's an ebb and flow, and we just sort of try to go with it.
Pat, I can't believe that's all from one church. This is one church you're talking about, right? One.
Yes, it's one
okay.
church.
That's amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank
We
you.
do try to pull volunteers from other churches though. So wherever we can get them, they're welcome.
Stop people in the street.
Exactly.
Right, right. I really appreciate how many things you listed off there as far as how to find funding. So I will ask you to maybe for a list, because that always helps people think of what to look for in their area too. So
Okay.
thank you so much, Deacon Pat. And I bet there are questions for you. We're gonna hear one more story and then get into some questions and answers. And I know that Lois and Kathy, right, from Madison, Wisconsin, a very different area. And let's see, you can unmute. Go ahead, and then you're allowed to share your screen, right?
Yes.
There we
And
go. Let me know if you need help.
I wonder if, yeah,
I'm Nick, and I'm going to introduce to you both Lois Komai, a longtime steward, and Kathy Henning, a more recent volunteer and avid photographer of our prairie restoration. We're remembering that the feeding the community of the subtitle for this gathering of our prairie radiates out not just as vegetables from our community gardens or going to food pantries from our pantry garden, but also thinking about all the neighbors who are nurtured by time there, by carbon sequestered, and the insects who have habitat, zillions of microbes in the soil who find sustenance in life, and much more. With this, Advent Lutheran is a partner congregation with Community of Hope United Church of Christ. So tonight, because Lois is a member of Hope, we're not just Lutherans Restoring Creation, but also UCC Restoring Creation. Thanks, Lois and Kathy.
okay.
That was Pastor Nick Upthal, by the way. I don't know if you said that, did you? Hi. Okay. You okay sharing it there? Let's see. We just see Lois's name right now. Lois and Kathy, you still there? We can't hear you. Hey, Nick, you don't happen to have the presentation, do you?
They're all muted.
Oh, let's see.
Sorry,
I don't have the
we're here. We were just trying to find our pictures. Here they
No,
are.
it's like the screens aren't big enough for all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute.
Okay, that's okay. We get to look at the inside of your house.
Yeah.
We can also celebrate tech support from Larry.
I know that. Oh, great. We see it. There it is. Yay. And we can hear you. Go ahead.
There, I have to get.
So thank you, Nick, for introducing, because we do have a food pantry garden as well as community gardens. But the Madison Christian Community, this ecumenical ministry between a UCC and an ELCA church, and we were given land over 50 years ago from a neighbor farmer. And we have 7.5 acres. And our prairie came out of the desire of our congregation to care for the earth. Historically, our land is the home of the Ho-Chunk Nation and included at that time grasses and flowers of native plants. But in the 1850s, settlers arrived in Wisconsin and they tilled the land. The fire stopped and the prairie disappeared almost, and it was a loss of huge diversity. By the 20th century, 0.1% of the prairie in Wisconsin is in existence. It's almost totally disappeared. The loss of this prairie habitat impacted large and small animals, birds, reptiles, and just loss of a tremendous diverse habitat. So we have a chart here that shows you the growth of the prairie, the depth of the roots, and this is what is the secret to the Midwest soil. Generally, as you can look at this, a third of the growth of the plant is above ground and 2/3 is below ground. But I want you to take a special look at the Kentucky bluegrass, which is just to the left of the dotted line. That is our normal lawns, and that is does not hold water. It does not aerate the soil. It doesn't help protect the soil or sequester carbon. So because of that little lawn and little grass root system, we have a lot of problems with runoff. The unusual thing though with a prairie is it doesn't look very appealing. It's a very messy lawn early in the spring, and we're used to a very mowed look, but this is the nature of prairie. The prairie doesn't green up in the spring. It remains brown, but you could start to see just a little bit of the prairie starting to emerge among the grasses and the deadheads that were there the year before. We have some pictures here of some of the insects and the animals that really provide, that live on this prairie. Our prairie has a rich complex of plants, and it feeds these insects. This is a native bee on bergamot. This is a beautiful picture of another native bee that's gathered pollen from a grass head flower. And on this one flower, the stiff goldenrod, we have a honeybee, a bumblebee, and a soldier beetle feeding on that. Of course, monarchs were mentioned in the monarch garden. The monarchs are feeding on the black-eyed Susan. We've got a skipper that is nectaring on, again, bergamot, female goldfinch, and a widow skimmer dragonfly. These are all some of the animals that are on our prairie and that we support. In early spring, the prairie vegetation emerges. There's with passflower. This is just a burned picture of our burn this spring. It's just starting to emerge. In particular, we are very pleased. There's a prairie hyacinth. It's a species that's of concern in Wisconsin. It feeds, again, the native bees and pollinators. So we're very pleased to see this emerge on our prairie. In June, it starts to become a taller prairie, Baptisia and spiderwort. Again, notice that little tiny bee getting the nectar and that pollen on that spiderwort. And in July and August, it's a rich prairie showing with butterfly milkweed supporting our monarchs, bergamots, coreopsis, a very special one, rattlesnake master, and of course, purple cone. And these prairie plants especially adapt themselves to the drought and the heat. And notice here how these plants protect themselves with just these little fuzzy hairs to save and keep the moisture. Here is a long-legged fly on a waxy surface, again, protecting and reserving the moisture. And another adaptation of these prairie plants are the very narrow leaves, again, protecting themselves and holding their moisture. In September, the grasses are just the star, and they are this reddish golden glow to the prairie. We have very special here, the big blue stem, little blue stem, and side oats grama. Well, that's side oats grama in flower. Just a beautiful little thing. But the work on the prairie is pretty exhausting. There's a committed group of people that first started this prairie back in the 1970s with digging up some native plants and gathering some seed and spreading the seed. Over the 50 years of the MCC prairie, we've now grown to about 3 acres. My enthusiasm for this is watching the plants grow and digging, and I was convinced of being able to do this on a lovely fall day, gathering seed on a prairie remnant. There's other people that are helping on this prairie. It's a huge job. When the native lawn is seeded, the non-native seed bank is still there. So there we are, pulling weeds. I call this our weed therapy. And there are miracle moments, such as noticing a newly emerging plant after 20 years of germination. And we give homes to all these unique insects and soil microorganisms. This is a special little festive fruit fly on a leaf, and the bumblebee on the aster, nectarine on an aster. So photographing these incredible variety is our crew, Kathy Henning, who loves to show her and the basis of her pictures here today. Final thing is fire. Fire is essential, and we burn every spring, but we rotate on these 3 acres. We do not burn all 3 at one time because the insects have overwintered, and we don't want to destroy a population of these insects. The fire also sets back non-natives, and it's a controlled burn, as you can see here. It's controlled by mowed lawn, by our concrete and our blacktop driveway and the sidewalk. So we have a definite control on this. And it's afterwards, it's amazing again to see these plants emerge after a burn that we had this spring. There are many rewards and faith developments in this endeavor. Words of faith that emerge for all of my coworkers and myself: trust, love, patience, blessing, discipleship and commitment, hope, and more love.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to share this.
Thank you so much. And thank the photographer as well, because what I love about your storytelling is that otherwise, you know, you mentioned, oh, it looks kind of like a messy, unkept lawn. And all of those photographs just drew you right into all of the joy that's really in that prairie. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm sure that I'm looking for more questions coming up in the chat. I'm going to take the opportunity, because I get to host, to start off by asking all 3 of you, what would be your best tips for, I know there are a variety of projects and you need to figure out your own context and who you have at the ready and really listen. But when you start to do any kind of community gardening project, or any project where you have to depend on volunteers to keep things alive, right? How have you found literally how to organize and make sure you don't kill living things trying to get this done? What are some of the tactics that you've found work to really make sure it's not just you out there every day by yourself? I'd love to know, and you can be honest, you don't have to throw anybody under the bus, but be honest about any challenges, because I'm sure people have been finding challenges themselves. Whoever might want to take that first.
For us, I would say it's love of gardening. And you say, seeing the immersion of things coming up, and Kathy, what would you say?
I would say that Lois does 50% of the work and needs more help. And it's, but we do have wonderful volunteers. It's just we could use more. But she knows so much. So those of us who work with her have learned a lot. It's a school on the prairie.
This is Pat Harper, and volunteers are always a challenge, but we do start with people that love to garden, people that love to plant and grow vegetables. And while there aren't many, there are some out there. And so we start with just trying to gather those individuals and get on a regular schedule. And there's a lot of follow-up and calling that I do. But we also do things like we do for our youth. We know that the teenagers need service credits. So we will get the teenagers involved and try to coax them along and say, you can use this for service credits. And again, the goal is to get people in the garden, because once they're in the garden and they experience it a couple times, what we find is they want to come back. I have a woman that would not go into the garden, and I coaxed her and coaxed her. She finally got out in the garden, and I had to start saying, you know, Vicki, we got to go now. It's nighttime. So the key is to get them in the garden and let the spirit work, and let the garden work, and let the nature work, and that somehow keeps people coming back. And so that's sort of how we do it. We do the stipends for people that are in need, and that helps support some volunteerism. But it's a ebb and flow with the work. But having that core group is critical in making sure that the plants in the garden is tended to from May, when we're preparing the garden, to the end of October when we're doing our final harvesting.
So I'll be honest that one of the things I've always lamented about the Trinity Community Gardens is that we have hardly any church members that volunteer in it. It's a pantry garden. We give all the food away. Part of the reason that we don't have very many volunteers is because Dale was such a stickler. And there's a reason that everybody covets our garden, because it's beautiful, but it's because he was a perfectionist and nobody wanted to really work with him. So, but he loved it. And so, other master gardeners would work with him. And so that's why I say I really don't know what the future of our garden is, because we've just depended so much on the community. And it's funny because our garden is right there on Lone Star. It is very visible. It's why a lot of people have actually joined our congregation, because they love that a church is using its land for this, but they don't necessarily want to work in the garden. So you just really need some champions, and I'm not, they were kind of mad at me because I wasn't out there every day with them. But I you just need some champions. You need that core group who's going to get other people excited, like the other people on this panel with me, who are those champions.
I do think it's really important to remember that you can't expect your pastor to do this. It's not part of the gig necessarily. Right. One other, just to add to the spectrum too of getting volunteers, I go to a very small church. We just didn't have many people that lived right nearby that were willing and able to come and keep something sustaining. But we have an incredible organic gardener who puts together every year an incredible garden and has this excess that he will then, Ray Hall brings in this bounty and we'll share at our own little mini farmers market and then sell his produce, and all of the proceeds go to ELCA World Hunger. So, you know, there's this, you guys have these extreme examples of wonderful community gardening, but sometimes if there is just one person, that I think is just a great example of that one person deciding to, I'm still going to make a difference, and here it is. So thinking, go ahead.
Well, I just saw a question in the chat that I wanted to answer.
Right.
This co-oping model with recipients of the food contribute labor hours. So a very different community garden model in the Boise area is our sister congregation King of Glory, which is north of the mall, if you know Boise. They are in a large, near a large refugee population, mostly Congolese refugees. And so they like lease the plots, the raised beds to the refugees for a certain amount. So that's a totally different model that's really community garden, whereas ours is more of a pantry garden. But I think there's lots of those models out there.
There was also a question too, if anybody has any idea of more nonprofits to help. Sorry, Mark, I'm trying to, Mark, if you want to unmute and ask your question, go right ahead. Mark Carlson, there you go.
Yeah, thanks everybody. This is great, especially Megan. We'll get by there again one day soon, I hope. My question was because of a number of churches that aren't growing, they got excess land when land was relatively inexpensive. So they're just sitting around with fire hazards that they've got to maintain and all that, places that people dump trash. But that could be networked into what I would see a commercial scale agriculture operation. And so, you know, community gardens are a lot of work. My wife manages one that's on the map. But a commercial scale with all the buzz about immigrant farmers, about reentry for people who've been incarcerated, young farmers, you know, it's just one of those, as Pogo said, an insurmountable opportunity, it seems to me. And there's a strong policy commitment, at least in California, state and local, to doing things like that. It's just the execution, the organization. So just throwing that out there if anybody, you know, has ideas or wants to think about that.
Well, and I don't know about California, but like I loved Pat talking about the University of Minnesota. I mean, I think if they're funded at all, the land grant universities and the extensions are still a great resource. I mean, they are kindred spirits to me in many ways. Pat, I don't know if you found that too, but they're just great.
Yeah, and you know, I am also an alumni from the University of Wisconsin, so it's wonderful hearing about the prairie lands and the work being done there. But the universities are just a wonderful source to draw from in terms of people for capacity, teaching opportunities, learning opportunities. It's just, they're just wonderful places. I did want to, there was one question in the chat room about where the butterflies came from. I did order these teeny tiny butterfly caterpillars from somewhere in Michigan, and I don't know where they came from. It was a very stressful situation, but we ordered more than enough. The people in my office still remember the stories about them calling saying the butterflies didn't come, the caterpillars didn't come, or they did come. So, but you can get a large quantity, and I would have to look up the name of the place that I ordered them from, but that's where we got the very tiny caterpillars that we fed milkweed from the garden. And watch them grow into crystalli and then into a full-blown monarch butterfly. It's just a wonderful experience.
That's amazing. And I wanted to lift up too, I knew that we have an expert in the room as well on monarch butterflies. Donna Pellegrin, if you can unmute and share a little bit about, yeah, especially any particular resources, if you can add in the chat, Donna, that'd be great.
Oh, sure. And can you hear me? Is my audio
Yep.
okay? All right. first of all, my heart is just full from these stories. I'm all choked up. But thank you, everyone, for what all you're doing. It's amazing. But as far as the monarchs go, I'm the director of a small nonprofit. It's called Youth for Monarchs. You can learn more about monarchs at youthformonarchs.org. And there's lots of resources on our resources page to start you into monarch conservation. Basically, if you plant it, they will come. If you plant milkweed, you will get monarchs. If you want to jumpstart that and order the caterpillars, you can, but it's not necessary. You can get monarchs just by planting the milkweed. Eventually, they will find you. California, with all the fires, you may actually have to order some caterpillars, and you can do that. The safest place to get them would be monarchwatch.org, and they have them for. They will send you a small number of caterpillars for educational purposes.
Thank you.
And I'll put Youth for Monarchs in the chat.
Awesome. And I see there are a lot of great resources being shared in the chat. Please know that I will get all of these out to everyone via email and a post. So you don't have to feel like you have to capture all of it. I'm also going to share kind of to the idea that there are larger nonprofit operations going on. One of them is having an event. I just shared their flyer, the Sierra Pacific Synod Hunger Network, Farming Hope. Is having a presentation Thursday night. There's a flyer there. So you might want to click that because it probably won't be until Thursday morning that I get you all this information. But again, for resources and ideas and inspiration, this is really exciting. Are there other particular questions that you're burning to ask that did not get in the chat? Because we just have a few more minutes and I have some other stuff to share. Okay. So a few other things that I just wanted to share with our network in general that I did share on the email that just went out to remind you of this call tonight. One thing is that, we've been talking, I think starting at the beginning of the year, we had a great presentation about someone that just shared their process of figuring out how to do a land acknowledgement. And we all started to talk a lot more about what does actively repudiating the doctrine of discovery have to do with our Caring for Creation ministry? And we've continued that conversation on many different levels. But right now we're really called to action very specifically to stand with the Treaty People Gathering going on in Minnesota. However we can join them. I will add this link in the chat. If you can get there physically between June 5th and 8th to stand in solidarity against Line 3. There is a lot more information about what Enbridge is doing in that particular part of the world, but also across the network of the United States and many other places. I just really want to highlight this because it's something that we can do, and there are different avenues for all of us to get involved. And it's coming up really, really quickly. So I'm going to copy that and paste it. What I would encourage you to do is sign up to either just register for the Green Faith event. I went to the informational Zoom last night and I learned a lot. And if you just register for it, you can get the recording. You don't have to be there Thursday night. So putting that in there. And again, within the next day, I will get this out to everybody. Even though, let's see. So that, probably, any other quick announcements? The one other thing I wanted to follow up with too is that our Creation Care, our Earth Day worship service was a huge success, and I'm so grateful for all of you who participated. It was so cool the understanding that there were tens of thousands of Lutherans all, worshiping together. It was really pretty cool. Some silver lining in all of this, right? And but from that, we really asked the bishop. It was great to have Bishop Eaton do an incredible sermon, but we wanted to ask her a little more. So the Lutherans Restoring Creation Board took some questions, and we're we're able to spend an hour with her, and we're going to have that edited and polished and stuff and be able to share that with you soon. Some more of her insights as to where our church is right now and how we can act more on climate justice in collaboration with groups like ours as grassroots organizations. Trying to think if there's anything. I want you to stay in touch because I will be putting out a date for a late June Connections call where we're going to be focused a little bit more on, I met an incredible young scientist who happens to be an 8th grader and has a lot of information and perceptions of how Eurocentric science and other ways of knowing can come together. And she's a wonderful storyteller, and I really want to have her share story with this larger network and be in conversation about about how science fits into our faith. So I think that should be an interesting conversation, and I'll come out with a date with that soon. So with all that said, yeah, I'm really just so grateful for all of the storytellers tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to ask Deacon Pat once more to, if you can unmute and close us out in prayer. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. And yeah, I can't wait to see you next month. Over to you, Pat. Thank you.
The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Also with you.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for each and every person that joined this call today. We thank you for the wonderful work that's being done to the gifts that you've given us, the earth, the water, the land, the prairies, the monarch butterflies. We just are so thankful for the gifts given to us and the care that each person is taking with the gifts that you've given us. We thank you for just life, air to breathe. We thank you for the richness of this earth and this planet. And we just pray that we will be able to continue to nourish it in a manner that is right by you. Again, thank you for each person that takes the time to care for the earth, that cares for the insects, for the butterflies, for the cabbage, for the tomatoes, for the collard greens, for the okra. Just thank you, Lord. Thank you for everyone that volunteers in this garden and the gardens that we have and the prairie grasses that are being tended. We're just so thankful to have so many people care for this earth. We thank you for the Lutheran ministry that supports this initiative. And with that, all the honor and glory goes to you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I'm telling my kids that you prayed for cabbage.